Hi, I'm Steve Fernari, and I'm the founder of the Flagler ESE Support Group. I'm here today with Trevor Tucker, who's running for Flagler County School Board for District 4 in the August 28th primary election. Mr. Tucker is the incumbent candidate running against challenger Paul Anderson. As a reminder, the school board election is a nonpartisan race, which means that any registered voter in Flagler County can cast a vote in all districts. Today, we'll be asking Mr. Tucker questions about his positions on exceptional student education in Flagler Schools. And we've given all of the candidates in the school board race an opportunity to interview with us, and we'll be asking every candidate the same questions, but we'll possibly have different follow-up questions where warranted. Welcome, Mr. Tucker, and thanks for agreeing to talk to Flagler County's ESE community.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. So according to a recent article in the Daytona News Journal, there are approximately 1,900 ESE students in Flagler schools, which is just shy of 15% of the entire student population. How well versed are you in current issues about special education? And do you have any special experience with or personal connection to ESE?
I do not have any personal connection to ESE. I haven't had a family member, and I haven't had any students that I've ever had a lot of interaction with in that group. I have read a lot of the laws, but I can't say by any means am I an expert in this field.
What would you say are the top two issues in Flagler schools with ESE right now?
Probably communication with parents, because I think there is a disconnect, and I think it's getting better, but I think that's probably been a bigger issue than other things. That's number one. And then how do we get the best training for individuals who are going to support those students?
Okay. There's a perception among ESE parents, it's a perception that the district administration is insensitive to parent struggles, which causes considerable frustration among parents. In a recent survey of our support group members, 48% of all parents felt the district was more of an adversary versus only 16% who viewed the district as a partner. Many ESE parents have hired advocates or lawyers. A high percentage of parents have removed their children from the district and placed them in private schools or homeschool. And recently there's been chatter among ESE parents about filing a class action lawsuit against the district for, among other things, violating IDEA, failure to provide a free and appropriate public education, and discrimination. Parent-district relations can have a massive impact on the district and taxpayers. So if elected, what would you do to improve relations between ESE parents and district admin?
As a board member, it's probably hard to be a direct conduit between, because we're not in the direct operations of the school, the day-to-day operations. And realistically, the day-to-day operation folks are the ones who really drive ESE and really interact more with parents than any board member will ever interact. We create policy, we have financial obligations. What we have to do is make sure we have a superintendent that we hire who wishes to work with parents to make everything better. We do need to have a better relationship with parents, ESE parents, and even all parents. I mean, if the parents have a quality relationship with the staff, then that makes a great environment for the students. As a board member, because we're not in the day-to-day operations, we come in and check in on schools, but we're not there at the the IDEA meetings. We're not there at any of these meetings. So it's really hard as a board member to make that change. What we really have to do is make sure we have a superintendent who cares about that, makes it one of his priorities to move the district forward with that. And I think we have that with our current superintendent. I know that I believe they're starting a committee or group that's made up of parents and ESE staff to help with the relationship. I believe they're working on that. I don't know if it's been created or not yet.
It's in progress, and yes, you're correct. There is a parent advisory council that's
what it's called.
That is being established. Now, I understand the limited role that you could play, but the superintendent, Mr. Taggart, does report to the board, and I'm sure accepts the board's recommendations. So in that regard, if you're seeing issues from your constituents, I would imagine that's something that you could raise with the superintendent.
Yes, of course. I mean, that should be the response of board members, is to bring it to the superintendent's attention. And the superintendent should then bring it to the attention of whoever in the district is going to handle that situation. If that's not occurring, then we really need to ask the superintendent why or why not that's occurring. As far as I know, any issues ever been brought to me and I've brought it to the superintendent, those things have started to be addressed, or at least someone has reached out from the district. That's my understanding.
So ESE parents routinely feel that decisions are made by the district that have a material impact on their children without input of stakeholders, including parents, teachers, and therapists. What's your position on getting stakeholders more involved in district decisions?
District decisions meaning, like, can I get some clarity? Because like policy, you mean policy, or do you mean like procedures? Because procedures is really kind of up to the superintendent and those folks. Policy is up to the board. That's which, like, school board decisions or
It could
district personnel?
I think in this instance,
that's a hard question to answer.
District personnel, because school board decisions would be presumably public.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about specifically here are decisions being made by district personnel. Like, for example, there was and we'll get into this a little bit later, but there was a decision to restructure the staffing specialists in the district that the ESE community was very upset about. Now, that's not a policy decision made by the board, but it was a material decision made by the district. And I think that parents are concerned, and I know the teachers and the therapists involved were concerned that the decision to make a material reorganization that potentially impacts $500,000 to $1 million of the budget was made without input from stakeholders. And so our question to you is, what's your position on getting stakeholders more involved in those decisions?
No, stakeholders should be involved in those decisions. They should have input. It goes back to that relationship with parents. We need to have a better relationship with those parents. If those parents then know what we wish to accomplish, or what the district wishes to accomplish, then they have input to say it. But whenever it's sprung on someone, then it might not. People feel like they're not being trusted, or they're not getting the information in the appropriate time, and that's a problem. I mean, flow of information is probably the most important thing the school district can do.
So what would you recommend specifically to the superintendent to make that happen more often?
Probably the superintendent or somebody in our district should be meeting with parents or a group and say, hey, we're having these outreaches so this many times a year. That really should happen, because if the superintendent changes personnel, changes something, the board may not, we vote on it, but we don't know how that material impacts a family or a student, because we're not in the day-to-day operations. So, the superintendent is kind of the key, in my opinion, to making a good relationship between the district staff and the parents. So, the superintendent should be moving forward with either saying, hey, staff, we need to do this, but that's really the most important thing for the superintendent to be able to get his message out to parents. If there's something changing within the district, the parents should know about that. That's just important. I mean, it goes back to that communication piece. The board, operations are not our thing. So things happen, things change, and then sometimes we find out about them after the fact too.
So this year, every year, as you know, Flagler Live interviews candidates, Flagler Live being our sort of local new online news outlet. And so this year, all of the candidates were asked about the district's most recent B rating and how to improve it. And it seemed that there's a consensus among the candidates that in order to improve outcomes, improving outcomes for the bottom quartile will contribute significantly to improving the district's overall grade. And of course, ESE students make up a large percentage of the bottom quartile. So one of the things mentioned to bring the bottom quartile up, and I believe it was you who made this comment, was that tracking those students earlier in the school year so they can get supports necessary to move forward in their education. Yet ESE parents routinely report being told by district staff that their children will have to fail for a year before being considered for support. And once they do get support, many parents complain that the supports are inadequate for their children to be successful. Based on our experience, earlier tracking alone isn't enough. So, if elected, what would you do to ensure that the district administration improves the supports for the ESE students and, in fact, does identify and provide services early?
So I've had this conversation with the superintendent about, if we really, to get to an A, we really do have to, that bottom quartile has to move forward. And a large portion of that is ESE. And we agree that there has to be supports in those areas that when someone's identified and they need supports, it has to happen. If it's not happening, then that's an operational issue that board members and, parents should be bringing up and saying, hey, I'm not getting that. And if, and I'm no expert in ESD, so I would not ever be able to tell a parent that the district did something wrong, because that's not my forte. The district says this is our expert and they say this thing. It's really hard for me to go against that because I am not an expert in this area. You see what I'm saying? But at the same time, in order to move things forward, the superintendent agrees with me that we have to get the supports in earlier.
So what do you think is the reason as to why you're not getting the supports in? Not necessarily the timing, but the actual supports. So if you address supports with the superintendent, what's your perception of why the supports aren't being provided?
Well, I believe that you're going to start seeing a change in difference. We have a new superintendent. He's been here 1 year. First year, for most new job folks, it's learning the people, learning everything, and then from there. But I really, truly believe that he's going to get those supports for the students that are needed. I mean, traditionally, I'll tell you, supports are probably held off due to finances. Every principal said, this is my budget, this is what I can spend. And unfortunately, the principal will say, oh, I don't have the money. Well, if it's truly a support that's needed, then they need to be coming to the board, or the superintendent needs to come to the board and say, we need these funds. I mean, we've been putting money in reserves, but if they're truly needed, then they need to be for the students. That's what the tax dollars are for.
And is it your impression that the principals are going to the superintendent or the district administration that they need resources?
That I don't know. I'm just saying that's what should happen. Principals should be going and saying, hey, need these resources. I don't know if that's happening or not.
Okay, so Flagler Schools has a large population of students affected by autism spectrum disorder. In fact, 52% of our ESE support group members have a child affected by ASD. Applied behavior analysis, which is also known as ABA therapy, is an evidence-based science in which behavior modifications are systematically applied to improve behavior to a meaningful degree. ABA has been widely described as one of the most effective treatment for students with ASD, leading to substantial lasting improvements in the lives of education of children with autism. And not just autism, also related disorders. It also improves reading and writing skills, which would help with your bottom quartile issue. ABA therapy is endorsed by the US Surgeon General, the NIH, and the Association for Science in Autism Treatment. Currently, Flagler Schools has just one behavior specialist for 1,900 students and no therapist certified in ABA therapy. So if improving outcomes for the bottom quartile by providing support as a district goal, how is the district going to meet that goal if it's failing to provide the right kinds of support?
Now you're out of my realm here. This is something that I don't know about. I have not heard, this is outside of my realm here. I don't know what that therapy is. I don't know anything about that therapy. I'll be truthful with you.
It's not a question of this therapy. I think this type of therapy is an example of a certain kind of support that parents are asking for that they're not getting, and that's also widely accepted among educators and the healthcare industry as something that works very well for a particular segment of the population. And, behavior therapy is something, whether it be ABA therapy or any other kind of therapy, for children with ASD is, paramount to success, to improving their outcomes.
If,
But yet we're
if,
not providing that support. And so, I think this is just an example, one of many in the district, where there are inadequate supports in place. So
if the ESE department or someone came forward and said, we need these personnel, these supports, and we have funding for these supports, and if we don't have funding, but it's still a necessity, then we need to find the funding or be more creative with funding. Then we should get those supports. I mean, I can't say 100%, but for me as a board member, I'd have to have the ESE department come forward and say, we need these things, or principals come forward and say, we need these things, move our folks forward. That's, but if they don't come forward to me, then I don't know.
So what you're saying though is that you're supportive of additional supports as represented as being needed by the ESE department or the superintendent, provided that they're providing you with a basis for which to either use existing funds or allocate funds from someplace else.
Yes. As long as the ESE, we need this to help our students, it'll move our students forward. Then, and why would we not want to support that? I don't think any board member would not want to support that unless you didn't have adequate. I mean, a lot of years we put money in reserves. So that's the question is, but no one come forward and saying, hey, we need these extra supports at that time. But I think you have a superintendent now who's probably going to start working on these supports. I mean, he did mention specifically the lowest quartile, and he did mention ESE. Said if we move the ESE population in the lowest quartile, because it made up, I can't remember what the percentage was, but it was a chunk of that lowest quartile. That was his back to school speech. And he said, we need to move that forward. What do we need to do to get there? Those are very important for our district. So I hope that answers questions. Yes, I'd be supportive of this thing.
I think it does. I mean, I don't expect you to understand all of the nuances of ESE, not being involved in every day, but I think being supportive of the community's needs is important. Approximately 4 years ago, the district moved ESE to a full inclusion model, and students, parents, teachers, and staff are still struggling with it. Parents are unhappy because their children aren't making educational gains, and teachers, especially general education teachers in inclusion classes, are unhappy because they feel unsupported. What are your ideas for resolving this issue?
They have to do sooner and better, because I've heard teachers say, I have a student in my class who's been in inclusion, it took a long period of time before they just got enrolled in the district. Parents said, hey, my child has ESE needs. And they put them in an inclusion class, and general education teachers said the child shouldn't be there. And then after 6 or 8 weeks, the child is finally moved because it finally got the IEP meeting, I guess is that where it is, where the services come in and they do everything. Well, but then the child got out of the general education class and went into their own class. Well, that shouldn't take so long. That should be faster. That process must be faster. And the teachers and everyone involved should know whether that's be in that class or not. I'm saying, like, this is a matter of, hey, this child can be in this general education class. This child cannot. I mean, that has to be up to the professionals who know better. And when they pushed for full inclusion, I think that was a statewide push. I think that was a problem for, the general ed class and everybody going in. And also, I don't think the teachers had the appropriate training at the time. But I feel now they're moving a little bit away from that. They're getting back to where the child needs to be in the appropriate classes. Does that make sense?
I think so. So, are you suggesting greater use of self-contained classes for students with disabilities?
Only students who would thrive better in that class. There's certain, if a student thrives well in education class, they should be a general education class. If they're in a self-contained class because they feel more comfortable and they're getting more supports there, then they should be in a self-contained class. That's all up to the individual, student and parents. I don't think that should be, hey, we're going to throw everyone in this and see what happens. You see what I'm saying? Like, that's really needs to be parents, teachers. There's a lot of input into that, whether that child should be in general or a self-contained class. Some kids thrive in self-contained classes. Some kids thrive in general, whatever they call them, classes.
So I'll sort of fill you in on a little of the details of inclusion. There is 30 years of educational data that suggests that students, even with very severe disabilities, can be successfully educated in general education classrooms with their typical.
If they have the supports, right?
And they also say that there are ancillary benefits for students.
That's the problem. They don't get the supports. If a student's put in a general education class and they don't have the supports to be successful, then they probably shouldn't be in that general education class. But if they're in the general education class and they have the support to be successful, I think that's what counts. And I don't know if the district's done the best job with that.
Well, you may or may not know that under IDEA that, putting a student in the least restrictive environment with their typical peers is the law. And that, moving
right.
students into a self-contained classroom because the school district doesn't have adequate supports is not an excuse for separating students with disabilities into a segregated classroom, that the school district has to provide the supports to make it successful.
Yes, and I don't know if we have in the past. I mean, maybe if you have a general education teacher who's not had a lot of experience with a ESE child, are they going to have the truly best experience at that child? So that's, either we have to up the training or have to have the correct supports in that general education class.
So that's a fair point. And we conducted.
We haven't had support for education for those teachers.
We've conducted a survey of our members, and 64% of the parents in our membership actually prefer the inclusion teaching model over self-contained classes, provided it works. Does that sway your decision in terms of providing the supports and the training for teachers to keep the inclusion program and having it be more inclusive in terms of degrees of disability?
Yes, I mean, it's whatever's best for the student. So if we have the supports and that child thrives in general education class because they have the supports, that's where that child should be. If and I think we jumped into inclusion too fast. We jumped into it without everyone having it probably necessary. Just because someone is certified in ESE doesn't mean they're good at it. I hate to say that, but you have lots of general ed teachers who are certified in ESE. They may not be great at dealing with some with an exceptionality, if that makes sense. I mean, so if that teacher doesn't have the support or that student has the support, they won't be successful. And that's I think everyone wants a successful. Sorry.
Your response to this issue concerns me. And I tell you why. I think when it comes to ESE, the district has a culture issue, a culture of not wanting students with disabilities in the general education classroom because it's hard or inconvenient, a culture of being opaque about what's actually happening in classrooms, a culture of engaging in we're the experts and we know best for your child type of attitude. And the culture is gradually changing, but this culture is sort of a very outdated opinion about inclusion and students with disabilities, and it's bordering on discrimination. And the culture is gradually changing, but district staff with this old guard mentality, it creates a liability for the district because by routinely engaging in discriminatory actions or violating special education laws. what do you think that the culture should be as it relates to ESE? And what would you do to help foster that change in culture?
Um, I would, I can tell you what I think the culture should be. The culture should be everyone should be doing what's best for each student. Whether you're an ESE student or a regular student, every single one of these students everyone should be working towards making that child have the best performance possible in schools and also a wonderful education. So if the culture is saying, well, this child here isn't getting, I'm not going to pay attention to this child because of an exceptionality, then that's the wrong culture. That's not what we want. We want every child to have the ability to move forward. Every child is gifted. Every child has abilities. Every child can do something, no matter what. Every person is unique and has individual traits. So to me, that should be the culture, is how do we get every child what they need to be successful? Not every child's good at math, but some kids are. Not every child's good at language arts. Some kids are. What can we do to make those childs thrive in where they are best? That's the ultimate goal for education, in my opinion.
What would you do to help foster that change in culture, or foster that kind of culture in the schools?
And that's the harder part. I think as board members, I think what any board member should do is support when someone has an idea and says, hey, we can do this to students, we should figure out ways to either find funding to support those, to say our culture needs to be, yes, we can get there. Yes, we can do that. How can we get there? That's the most important thing as a board member. I'm not in the day-to-day operations. I don't walk into classes. I'm not there every day. So it's hard for me to know what that culture is. But as a board member, we need to support things when folks say, hey, this will help child. We should be supporting that and trying to move that forward. That makes sense. Because not being there day to day, it's hard to influence culture if you're not there day to day. But if you say, this is important to us as board members, we will fund this, that should show that this is an important thing to staff, to superintendent, and everything else. And then staff should say, hey, I'm on board. I want to do this. I have an idea. I can go to the superintendent and he can bring it to the board and maybe we can get funding. That's probably the best way I say we can influence culture. That makes sense.
Fair enough. Okay. This spring, there was a very big change to the organization of the district staffing specialists. We spoke about it a little bit before, and the ESE community had some serious concerns about this change, and we approached the school board for help after getting incomplete and conflicting information from the district administration about it. The staffing specialists came up before the school board at a workshop on May 15th. And since the public isn't given an opportunity to ask questions of district administration and get direct responses at the school board meeting, our support group prepared approximately 60 questions on 6 pages that we want to ask. Now, we didn't expect every question to be asked, but we expected a fair amount of questions to be asked. And at that meeting, only 3 board members asked questions, and I believe that less than 5 were asked from the list in total. Further, not one follow-up question was asked after the district admin gave its responses. Parents walked away feeling that the school board, their elected representatives, failed to make sure that their concerns were addressed. In the event a similar situation arises with respect to ESE, if elected, what would you do to ensure that parents feel that their concerns are addressed on the public record?
Parents should, they get the 3 minutes to ask any question before and then 3 minutes after, and we have workshops where they also get to ask questions. Outside of that, in the public forum, there's not really much of a public forum. You can email me, you can call me, and I have these concerns, but there's not much of a public forum for parents unless they ask to meet with individual members or meet with the superintendent. Most of the issues are, I think, operational. To me, the parents should probably, because if they're operational in nature, parents should probably want to meet with the superintendent, and the superintendent have meetings with him quarterly and express your concerns, especially if they're operational. Now, if they're policy or financial, that is more into our realm. You know, the information workshop, it happened so the board could know about that. But as we're not in the day-to-day operations, we don't say, hey, this is who you hire, this is who you don't hire. It's really the superintendent that parents should want to get to meet and get to know, advocate for, because we're gonna create policy over finances, not that shift.
In this instance,
superintendent driven.
I agree with you that parents should have their relationship with the superintendent and district administration, and we do. We meet with the superintendent quarterly and meet with the ESE director monthly. In this particular instance, we were getting inconsistent information from direct meetings from the superintendent and the ESE director for various reasons. It may have been a miscommunication on their end. And so we came to the school board to say, hey, we've had our meetings with the superintendent, we've had our meetings with the ESE director, we cannot get a straight answer from anyone. And we really just want to know what went into this decision-making process. And we did the work for you. We did the work for the school board in that we framed the issue and provided questions that we thought were adequate to get to the bottom of the decision-making process. And in large part, the school board did not, like I said, only 3 board members asked any questions, and no follow-up questions were asked of the ESE director after his presentation, and that frustrated parents. And so I'm curious as to why you think it is that the school board members, did not, when this was framed for you pretty easily, ask the questions that your constituents wanted answers to.
I feel that I forwarded those on to the ESE director, and whenever he was supposed to do the presentation, he was supposed to answer those questions. I don't know. I don't know if parents didn't feel that he answered those questions appropriately, or if they got enough background information on that. We had an information workshop specifically for that reason. Normally that wouldn't have shown up on the information workshop, but it came to the board members, and we said, okay, we want to hear about this. Let's have an information workshop on it. And those questions were forwarded on to the ESE director so he could answer those questions during that presentation. That was the concept behind it.
Right, but you do understand that the ESE director was responding essentially the same as he responded to us with his version of, of his position on the decision, and we wanted a deeper dive into that decision, which is why we presented the school board with specific questions. I don't know that his responses were any different from those that he had given us previously, which is why we went to you, because we're unable in a public forum to be able to ask those questions and get answers.
Hello?
Yeah, still here.
Oh, yeah, I lost you for a moment there, a moment or two.
So
might be this thunderstorm I have outside. So
okay,
sorry.
No problem. I'll repeat the question and we'll do an edit or the response. We appreciate that you passed that the school board passed the questions on to the ESE director, but the ESE director provided the school board with his version of how the decision process was made, and there's no way for parents in a public forum to inquire from the ESE director, a deeper dive into how that decision was made, and and I don't want to get into the nuance of this, but I guess the parents walked away feeling that what the ESE director gave was what he was giving us before in this particular instance. And it may be that the responses would have been the same on your inquiry, but the school board inquiry carries much more weight in a public forum than parents do behind closed doors. So as our elected officials, we were looking for the school board to ask the hard questions, basically, not to pass our questions on to the ESE director, because we'd already asked the ESE director those questions and had gotten an unsatisfactory response. I guess if that situation comes up again in the future, do you think that you personally, if you were elected, might handle a situation like that differently?
And I don't know how I'd handle that situation. I don't know if I'd handle it differently or not. Because at the same time, I don't, you know, if you hear an answer from an ESE director and the parent asks the question, and if I got the same answer as the parent, how, you know, this is one of those things that how do I know which person to trust or believe, the ESE director or the parent? I mean, it's one of those conflicting issues. Do I ask that question, or, you know, oh, well, the ESE director gave me an answer. Do I not trust the ESE director? Like that's, and there has to be more trust between parents and the ESE director and parents and the superintendent and parents, you know, because by the time it comes to the board, it's, you know, the trust is, I guess, is already broken by then. And that's the best way to put it, I guess, because, and then I don't know who I should listen to. But do you listen to the parent? Do you listen to the person who's supposed to be the expert? Or do you, you know, so that's always a conflict. And I don't know if I'd handle it differently. I don't know if I'd handle it some other way. But I don't want parents to not feel like their voices are being heard. You know, you know, the open line of communication, like I said before, it has to get better. That's the most important thing.
So going back to the Flagler Live interviews, all of the candidates were asked what their vision was for public education in Flagler County, and only one candidate had mentioned ESE in their response. We wanted to give candidates an opportunity to address the ESE community. So in this regard, what's your vision for ESE in Flagler County, and how do you expect to achieve that?
I actually expect the ESE community the same, like for me, it's all students should have the same vision and goals. They should have an academically challenging curricula, you know. If not, then they should have something where they can, if they don't plan on going down an academic track, they should have the ability to find a direction so they can end up with gainful employment whenever they're done. That's the same track I've envisioned for all kids, you know, to be able to have either one, like, hey, I want to be highly academic, I want to be highly successful, or I want to go down this other path. That's what I envision for all students. Everybody can do something. Everybody can contribute to society. I don't care what anyone else says. There's always something for someone that they can contribute. That's my opinion. So whether it's ESE or whether it's a general population, I have the same response. My expectation is for that student to either have you know, have the ability to take high academic courses or the ability to move into the job field, one or the other, whether they're ESE, general population, community students. That's my vision for Flagler County Public Schools. And we have to provide those opportunities. You know, whatever they may be, we have to provide those opportunities for every student. That makes sense.
Yep. Okay, well, listen, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to our community. I really can't tell you how much that means to us. We appreciate it very much, and we wish you the best of luck with your race. And if voters want to learn more about your candidacy and what you stand for about ESE and all the other issues related to Flagler schools, how can we do that?
Truthfully, I'm not much on campaigning, so tell them to give me a call. I'll give you my cell phone number, 386-931-5165. You know, if they call me during the day, I'll get back to them, but it won't be very quick because I'm working every day. And then in the evening time, I can usually get back to them, or sometimes I can get back to them during the day. So that's the best way to contact me. They can email me if they would like to Trevor Tucker@att.net. And those are probably the best ways to reach me. I don't have a web page. I don't have a Facebook page. So I guess that's it.
Okay, thanks again and good luck on your race.
Thanks a lot.